The fourth meeting of the House Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee and the fourth meeting of the House State Government Committee is called to order. Madam Secretary, please call the roll for the House Elections Committee.
Representative Baker, Representative Bivens, Representative Branscombe,
Here.
Representative Callaway,
Here.
Representative Chester Burton,
Present.
Representative Decker, Representative Gooch, Representative Hancock,
Here.
Representative Imes,
Present.
Representative Cook, Representative Scott Lewis, Representative Lockett,
Present.
Representative Marzian, Representative Roberts, Representative Hodgson, Chair Johnson.
Here. And then, Madam Secretary, if you would, please call the roll for the House State Government Committee.
Representative Decker, Representative Donworth,
Here.
Representative Gentry, Representative Griffey, Representative Hancock,
Here.
Representative Hodgson, Representative Huff,
Here.
Representative Imes,
Present.
Representative Johnson,
Here.
Representative Lehman,
Here.
Representative Chris Lewis,
Here.
Representative Maddox,
Here.
Representative Proctor,
Present.
Representative Tate,
Here.
Representative Thompson,
Here.
Representative Tipton,
Here.
Representative Williams, Representative Witten,
Here.
Representative Raymer,
Here.
Chair Hale.
Present.
Very good. Thank you very much. Before we start, as we always do with these committee meetings, I would ask that you stand with us. We're going to do an opening prayer, and then we will lead you in a pledge of allegiance. Chairman Hale, would you please open us in prayer?
May we pray together, please? Our Heavenly Father, as we gather here today in this room to do the business of the state of Kentucky, we're thankful for everyone that has joined us. We thank you for this joint meeting of these two committees. We thank you for our guest, Governor DeSantis, that has came to be with us today. We pray that you bless him in a very special way in the work that he is doing in his great state. We are honored today to serve the citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we're just proud to say that Jesus Christ is at the head of everything that we do. Bless this meeting today and everything we do. Let it be done for the glory of Almighty God, and we give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. A couple administrative reminders. If you are speaking or asking questions, or if you're presenting, please make sure that that green light on your microphone is well lit, bright glaring. And also, if you have your cell phones with you, of course we all do, please make sure they're either silenced or turned off. And just before we begin, would any members, do any of our members have any special guests they'd like to recognize today? Chairman Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some special guests that have joined me here today in this committee meeting. My county judge executive from Menifee County is with me, and also several students from the JAG program at Menifee Elementary. Would you please make them welcome with us today? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'll also mention we have several committees going on simultaneously, so we may be having committee members coming in and out. Committee members, as you come in, if you need to make sure that you register your presence, please feel free to do that. And we will get to our only item on the agenda today, which is a discussion of House Concurrent Resolution 45, sponsored by Representative Jason Petrie. Chairman Petrie, if you'd like to come forward with your guests. So, Chairman Petrie, guests, as we always do before we do introductions, if you'll raise your right hand, please. You swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. And Chairman Petrie, the floor is yours. If you will introduce yourself for the record and your guests as well. We're very happy to have the guests here today.
Very good. Well, introduction of guest Jason Petrie, House Representative, District 16, Logan, Todd, and part of Christian counties. And to my right, go right ahead.
I'm Ron DeSantis. I'm the governor of Florida.
Simple enough. And further to my right.
My name is Lauren Enns. I lead the national campaign for a balanced budget amendment.
Very good. May I?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairs. I appreciate the opportunity, and members of the committees, I appreciate the opportunity from y'all also. This is not an issue that is new. I have filed resolutions before. The issue has been around, and the issue being a proposed resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 45 in this instance, that would lend support for calling and proposing an amendment at the federal level that deals with a singular subject. The singular subject being to balance the budget. In Kentucky, we have the advantage of having a constitutional requirement that we balance the budget, and as we go through these budget sessions, that is the first and last starting point of everything we do. Unlike the state, this Commonwealth, at the federal level, that does not exist. And over decades and decades, and regardless of what political party is in power or in sway or what issues come up and to the front and to the back, we continue to have deficit spending through most all of that time. Deficit spending ends up with debt accumulation, and the balanced budget requirement would be the first thing to cut the deficit so we can begin to work on debts. I did not come to this issue of, I hear it and I go, oh, I like that. That's not how I arrived at this issue. Is there a way to start to balance the budget at the federal level so that we can pull that debt load down over time, or at least not have it increasing at the rate that it is, hopefully? Well, if we could just talk about the issue. That's not worked over decades. If we could replace with a different political party structure, Senate, House, whatever at the federal level, has seen no substantive move forward with that. Well, what if we just replaced everybody? Everyone said, let's vote them all out and start fresh. One, I'm not sure that I can see it happening under even remote political futures and long-term political futures, and I don't know that it would happen. What has happened, though, with all the deficit spending and the debt that has gained, there are things that are being paid for, that are being expended at the federal level for which we don't have the money to pay for it. And now we have debt that has been that credit card that has been called upon so many times. And as with credit cards in your own house, you can reach a point, if you don't manage it, that it will manage you. And unfortunately, I think we are at that point, past that point, or about to be at that point, and it becomes an existential threat at the federal level. And look, we don't live in isolation, so that's an existential threat in Kentucky. We would deal with it some way, and they would deal with it some way, but I would sure rather be on the front end and try to get some balanced budget requirement along so that we can avoid. So I don't come to the issue of, oh, that's a great idea, let's go there first. I have no other option available that I see that has any practical import of having some kind of effect at the federal level. And I'm all ears in case someone's got a good one, but we've got a lot of history that really defeats every possibility that I've explored, and this is where I've ended up at, and I would ask for your support on House Concurrent Resolution 45 to get that balanced budget amendment proposed, and then we'll go into the ratification process and get that done. With that, if it's okay with the chairs, I will turn this over to Governor DeSantis for any comments.
Well, thanks. It's great to be back in Kentucky. So this is the third time I've been here in the last 13 months. I was here for my first Kentucky Derby last year, which was quite an experience in Florida. We have a lot of synergy with Kentucky with the horse industry. It's a big thing in our state. It's obviously a big thing here. So there were a lot of mutual friends. And then I was also at January of 2025, Rupp Arena, Kentucky versus Florida basketball. And I think my
Excuse me, but Mr. Chair, can we skip over this part?
Well, point of order. UK won that game. UK won that, and I think my ears were ringing for like 2 days after. It's quite an arena, and yes, it's true. Florida ended up winning the championship last year. But I will tell you this. Kentucky is a great basketball state. Florida, at its heart, is a football state. And so even though we're the reigning basketball champions at the University of Florida, they had a terrible football season. And guess what? The fan base is not happy. And so we got to do better in football. But the first Republican president was born in Kentucky, and then when he became president, Abraham Lincoln famously said during the Civil War that he hoped to have God on his side, but he must have Kentucky on his side. And I kind of feel much different context, but that's what we need if we want to fix the nation's fiscal trajectory. We need the states to step up and do their constitutional role, and Kentucky absolutely has got to be a part of that. I mean, you've seen the numbers. We're $38+ trillion, and it is escalating very quickly every day. We now spend more on interest on our national debt just to service the debt than we do on national defense. And those numbers are going to escalate as some of these bonds have to be refinanced in the future. You go back to the 90s, and here's the thing. I'm proud to be, Republican. This is not a Democrat problem, this is a bipartisan debt problem. We've had Democrats in office spend. We've had Republicans in office spend. This century has had debt after debt from the turn of the century on. In the 90s, we actually had a balanced budget in this country. You had a Republican Congress and a Democrat president. They came one vote away in the U.S. Senate from actually passing a balanced budget requirement. We only had $4 trillion in debt at the time. Just imagine if that had passed, what difference the trajectory fiscally of this country would be. We'd be in so much better shape had those constraints been put on. And I'm here, so Florida has obviously certified this. 28 states in total have. We've got a couple more that we think will happen relatively soon. Kentucky hopefully be one of those. But the reason I'm here is because I don't think Congress is going to fix itself. I think the incentives up there are such that we're likely to continue more of the same. There's a culture that's developed. There's a muscle memory that's developed. And you can't just say elect new people and all of a sudden they're going to fix it. Because here's the deal. Even if somehow we did elect new people and they did fix it, the next Congress can come in and undo it. And so unless you have changes, permanent constitutional changes to the incentive structure in Congress, you are not going to solve this problem. And the question is look, how much more can you go into debt before we have a major debt crisis? I mean, at some point, reality is going to bite. And I think the U.S. has been able to get away with this longer just because we're the best bet in town. Whatever problems we have, a lot of these other countries have other problems. And so why would you guys want to be involved at the state level? Because that's what our founding fathers envisioned. This is America's 250th anniversary of independence, and obviously it took them, a decade or so to fashion a constitution. But when they created the Constitution, they believed that the states were the most important units of government. They were creating a federal government, but it was limited and enumerated to certain tasks. There were local governments created by the state governments, but ultimately it was the states that created the federal government and that ratified the Constitution. So they saw the states having a very, very important role. What about with constitutional amendments? Well, I think we just think muscle memory is, well, yeah, Congress proposes these amendments. You need 2/3 of each house. They can propose it, and then it goes to the states for ratification. That's one way to propose it. The other way to propose it is via the states with Article 5. And you have 2/3 of the states certified. A proposal can be fashioned, and then it can go to the states for ratification. The founders knew that Congress could be the problem. So they obviously wanted to provide a mechanism for we, the people working through our states, to be able to institute the reforms that'd be necessary. Some people say, well, Article 5, it's never really been done. That's not quite true. There have been a lot of calls for Article 5. What happens is once it picks up steam, like this is starting to do, Congress then sees the writing on the wall, and then they write an amendment, and then they send it to the states for ratification. And I should tell you, I'm fine if that happens. I think that would be quicker to do it that way. So if Kentucky comes on board, Idaho, a handful of these other states, and we get 31, 32, get into that where we're almost at 34, Congress wants to write a credible amendment, I'll be the first one to say, yeah, let's just do that. We don't need to go forward to certify Article 5. And I think that's what most likely would happen. But I don't understand this idea of somehow, if you do a convention, it's going to run away. First of all a convention can do is propose. Convention cannot change the Constitution. In order to change the Constitution, you need 38 states to ratify any change. And obviously, I don't think that anything bad would get 38. I mean, it's hard enough to get things that are very popular through that you do that. Also, each state would have one vote. And so, I do the math. I think that that's great. And then you as legislators, you can make sure that the people you send to that would be faithful. Like I said, I think Congress will end up writing it if we put pressure through the states. But I don't believe that these ideas that somehow you could never do Article 5, you're basically saying that the founders, were wrong about a key portion of the Constitution. I actually think the founders got it right. And so the question is, we can sit here and say, yeah, Kentucky's doing great, Florida's doing great. We have a lot of states that are doing good things. Certainly fiscally, the way you guys operate, the way we operate is much different from how they operate in Washington. And we can just say, hey, it's a Washington problem. The problem is it's going to affect our people in a really negative way if we have a big debt crisis. And so this is really, I think, the only way we're going to be able to head that off. We have the power to do it in our states. Many states have stepped up. And obviously, I think Kentucky would be a great, great candidate to join the movement to prevent Congress from bankrupting this country. And if we can do that, that'll be one of the best things these states have ever done.
Again, my name is Lauren Enns. I lead the national campaign for a balanced budget amendment. Really, there's not much more I could say in the wake of those two testimonies. What I would remind you is the mathematical impossibility that we are facing. $38.7 trillion in debt versus $5.3 trillion in revenue. That's a debt to income ratio of 7.5 to 1 approximately. If you were to put that in personal terms, 5.3 trillion in revenue, let's say that's $53,000 a year in salary. $387,000 in credit card debt would represent the $38.7 trillion. Just think about those numbers again. $53,000 a year is what you're making. And in credit card debt, you have $387,000. If you're a normal individual, you don't even think about trying to repay that. There's no way you even pay the interest on that. In fact, I don't know how any bank would ever let you get even close to that. The moment you know that's where you are, you walk right into bankruptcy court and it's over. Well, that's not an individual. That is we, the American people. 345 million people. Their future hangs in the balance. And what has Congress done? They've borrowed us to the point where we've been paying the interest on our debt for over 10 years with borrowed funds. So that's the classic scenario. Someone gets mortgaged to the hilt in credit card debt, and then they take out another credit card and another just to pay the interest. Well, we're at the point where the bank's about to cut off the 3 to 4 credit cards we've taken out to pay the interest on the other 10. That's where we are as a nation. And so, of course, Congress tried to propose this, as Governor DeSantis said, in 1995, when the debt was just a small fraction of what it is now. And they were having theoretical debates about how best to balance the budget when the debt really wasn't a threat. Well, here we are 30 years later. The debt is almost 8 times the size that it was just 30 years ago, and now it is that threat that they were worried about. This was a Ronald Reagan initiative back in the 70s and 80s. They got to 32 states at that point by 1983. A number of those states dropped off. We're back to 28. And as Governor DeSantis related, historically, if you get one state away from going to a convention, Congress has always shown up and proposed the amendment because they don't want to lose control of the amendment drafting. That determines the power of the amendment. And it's Congress's opinion that that's their turf. They don't want the states to do that. So they can be predicted to act in their own self-interest, to draft and propose an amendment, no need for a convention. And I'm more here to answer questions than anything. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Thank you for all the testimony for each of you. We do have a couple of questions, and I suspect we'll have a few more. I'm actually going to ask a question myself before we start. I'm just curious, and I think, Lauren, this is probably for you, but let's assume that we do get to a balanced budget and we have balanced budgets. What happens to the current debt? Does the math say that if we have a balanced budget, we start paying off the debt as well, or are we just saddled with this debt regardless of what happens down the road?
Yeah, we're adding another $2 trillion to the debt every year. So let's say we get a balanced budget amendment in place, and then we phase in the cuts over 10 years or so. I mean, we're borrowing more than 25% of the federal budget. So you cannot turn the lights out on that overnight. There's no way. So probably a decade to phase in those cuts. So we're talking maybe 13, 14 years to get to a balanced budget. If everything goes smoothly, at that point, where will we be? 60 trillion in debt, somewhere in that neighborhood. So this is just to stop the bleeding and get us to the point where we can say, okay, now that we've got to a balanced budget, we've reinstituted fiscal responsibility, then we can worry about paying down the debt. Historically, you need to grow your way out of that. Trying to even just, like Japan. Japan lives to just make its interest payment. If it misses that interest payment, its stock market probably implodes. So imagine us as a permanent debtor nation. That's what we're facing here. So at the point that we get our budget balanced, then we've got to figure out a way to grow our way out of that debt to income ratio that will be there. So this is just the first step.
Thank you for that. And we do have a couple of representatives that have questions or comments, and we'll start with Representative Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. Governor, you had mentioned the term runaway, as in runway convention. On line 4, it says the sole purpose. And I was wondering, is that enforceable? That
Yeah.
it's the sole purpose?
It's enforceable. So when you send delegates, Kentucky sends delegates. If we got to that point, you could. I mean, Florida, we've imposed criminal penalties on the delegates if they go outside. You guys have a whole host of things at your disposal to ensure that. But I would also say, like if I'm governor and I'm appointing, or the speaker, or whoever you guys decide to do it, I'm appointing someone that's going to do the job. I mean, why would I want to go through all this and not do it? So I think the idea that there'd be a runaway, I mean, just imagine Kentucky sends people to a balanced budget convention. How popular is it going to be if one of those delegates decides, oh, they want to get rid of the Second Amendment? I mean, like, could you even come back to Kentucky at that point? So I think that there are plenty of safeguards to ensure that doesn't happen. But I think it's also just worth pointing out. The Article 5 convention proposes, they draft and propose. You still, to make it part of the Constitution, it's got to go back to the states, and then you and the Kentucky legislature would have an up or down vote on should that be ratified. And you need 38 of the 50 states to ratify any change to the Constitution. That's why I don't think the risk of some of the things that are credible.
All right, thank you.
And if
Yes.
I may, if you look back, I think last session or the session before, I believe Representative Decker had a bill on faithful delegates. And you can go back and look at that of how, as the governor stated, you can put guardrails around how those delegates perform their actions, and failure to do so, with a lot of mechanisms built in along the way, failure has some pretty stiff penalties behind it.
One quick thing on that. 18 states have passed those faithful delegate or delegate limitation acts. And in most of the states, it is a crime, either a misdemeanor or a felony, for any convention delegate to violate their oath that they took when they were commissioned as delegates to stay within the confines that convention was called for. So the moment they get up and say, hey, let's talk about repealing the Second Amendment, their credentials to represent that state are revoked immediately. They're kicked out. And the moment they cross the state line, they can be arrested. And with ethical violations like that, I mean, remember, they swore an oath to their own chamber to abide by those limits. There could also be ethical things done with them within their own chamber for violating an oath that they swore to that chamber.
All righty. Thank you, gentlemen.
Is that all, Representative Huff? Any follow-up? Nope. Okay. Representative Callaway.
Yes, thank you all for bringing this. I appreciate it. I just had a quick question that you didn't talk a whole lot to. Maybe you could enlarge on. So I've been blessed. I have 5 children in their 20s. I have 5 grandkids and 1 on the way. What is the reality of what's going to happen if we do not address this debt issue? We know that it's a real issue, but what does reality look like if we do not address this?
Well, I mean, there's no free lunch, right? Eventually, someone's got to pay the piper. And the more the debt goes up, the more the interest payments go up, that runs a greater risk of having a significant crash. So, I mean, obviously, it could throw the economy into a tailspin, which would be bad for everyone. But just think of the share of the debt. What is the share for the average person? Hundreds of thousands of dollars now for the federal debt?
It's over $100,000 per U.S. citizen, and for a taxpayer, I think it's close to $300,000.
And so, you see what and I think part of the reason why I got involved in this over the last 5 or 6 years is the rate of the increase. So what does 38 trillion mean? Well, maybe that's really terrible. Maybe that's manageable. But all of American history, 1789, when the Constitution was ratified and Washington became president, to the year 2000, we had 5 trillion over that period of time. Since the year 2000, we've gone from 5.6 trillion to 38.5 trillion. That is, so it's exponentially going up, and I think that is really the big danger. So economic dislocations, less opportunity if the economy really falters as a result of this, which I think it would if you had a crisis, and then the fiscal of government would be thrown into a tailspin. How do you fund defense? How do you do all that stuff? When you have a debt crisis and interest rates spike and people don't want to buy the bond, it creates a whole host of problems. Now, that hasn't happened yet per se, right? And I think if we were sitting here in this room in 2010 and I said the debt's going to be 38.5 trillion by 2026, most of us would have said, no way. If that happens, we're going to have. So I think the fact that you haven't seen that is part of the reason why we're in this rut where people just say, yeah, just keep doing it. Just keep printing the money. Just keep borrowing the money. But I wish you could just do that. I mean, wouldn't it be good to just say, hey, yeah, just keep printing, use the credit card indefinitely. Don't worry about it. I mean, we know that doesn't work. I mean, you would never, you're not teaching your kids that. I'm not teaching my kids that. So I do think that the next generation, the young people, so my kids, people's grandkids, I think we're not doing our part to leave them this country better than we found it if we're not willing to address this.
And if I may, Representative Callaway, trying to look forward and not trying to go into scare tactics. This is just pure analytics and things I've been concerned about since 2010, 2012. You reach a critical mass where your interest payments are crowding out all of the expenses, which means you're going to accelerate your debt in order to maintain your spending and grow your spending, one. Number two, we have at least one country in the world that is situating itself to become the reserve currency of the world. They have different financials than we do, much better debt loads than we do, at least what data we see. They put themselves out on a sales pitch to take over the country's reserve currency status. That could put the United States in a tailspin of debt and financing that I don't know even where it will take us and how fast, but I don't like any form or fashion of it. Second, apart from that though, think about the United States as its stage on the world as you're dealing with trade negotiations, dealing with war, dealing with just regular ambassadorships and all kinds of issues that pop up, trying to release hostages, all kinds of things that we've all heard in the news. When you are a really well situated country with your debt under control and you come to the table, there is a certain weight that your words carry. When you come to that same table as the greatest debtor, there's a different weight. When you come as the greatest debtor with a decreasing ability to even fund and take care of your debt and show any fiscal discipline, at some point in time, you're basically shoved off the edge of the table. Let the adults in the room that take care of real business talk about decisions. I do not want to see us trend in that direction. So there are immediate physical consequences we have. There's also reserve currency. There's also where we at when we come to the table in years and decades into the future. Will we be able to influence like we have in years past? Those are real world concerns. And look, it's not a scare tactic, but just think in your own house or your own business. Think of the numbers that were just laid out before on credit card versus $57,000 or $58,000 worth of income. Is there any other space in your life's history where you can spend and go into debt without limitation? I'm going to put my glasses back on, and I want to see if anybody goes, yes. Some space where you have been able to, or you anticipate being able to spend without restraint and just float and kite the debt out there forever. Anybody. There are some people in the world that say that's true with government. I can't get there. I don't see it. I have no experience with it. And when I look at it, pure analytics, and if you were to put it in an ivory tower, it looks like crap. So I go with my experience on my house, my business, and what we've seen up here, and you can't just spend yourself into oblivion with the pressure label of, we'll just kite the debt and keep going, nothing will ever happen. then I go back to my first comments. If that is the case, and we are kiting the debt out there, and we are going into deficit to put more out there, even a slight interest rate change now affects how much our interest payments are on the debt unbelievably. What other mechanism do we have other than what the founders gave us in the original document to say when you get to a point that people through their states can propose something other to correct something that Congress and the federal level has not yet corrected on its own? I come back to House Concurrent Resolution 45.
And if I could add something real quick, when you think about a newborn child entering this world as a citizen of the United States of America, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and oh, by the way, here's your $100,000 plus share of the national debt the moment you breathe free air. By the time they're 18 and they can vote, who knows how big that debt's going to be. And I'll leave you with a Thomas Jefferson quote. He said, if one generation can leave its debts to another generation while they pass on, then the earth belongs to the dead and not the living.
Thank you. Well said there. Representative Lehman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a whole lot of questions, but could I just ask two?
I will go
respect
two
people's
quickly,
time?
please.
Okay, thank
We're
you.
already getting short on
I
time.
appreciate it. And I appreciate you, gentlemen. It's obviously a big topic, and I appreciate the focus on fiscal responsibility. I feel like we've talked about it more here than Congress has in decades. I mean, we're doing their job for them today, right? But I guess my question is, why do you think a convention of the states would get a different result than the current situation? I mean, we're talking about the same state legislators are going to be appointing delegates, probably from the same kind of political class. I mean, is there an expectation that they would do something different than what we have in Congress right now?
So I served in Congress for a couple terms. I've recovered from that experience fully. But I will just tell you, people go in, and I think the vast majority of people that run for Congress, have idealism. I think that they want to make a difference. But then you get there, and it's a meat grinder, and there's a culture. And it's, we'll get to that next. We got to do this. And then it's all about getting reelected and all these things. So there's all these different incentives that are there that are not leading in that direction. Whereas I think you put people to the delegates to be doing this, I think it's like a fiscal rescue mission by having constitutional constraints. That's their only job to do it. They're not part of D.C. They're not drinking the Kool-Aid. They're not going to the cocktail parties. They are coming from the people. They are being tapped to go do this solemn constitutional obligation. So I think the incentives will be much different. I think the incentives for anyone that goes to that convention, they're going to get something done. They want something that's going to help save this country. And even though I think a lot of members of Congress, when they run, I think have, and some may agree or disagree with me, but I think they all have an idea that they want to make the country better. But then once you're there, it just degenerates. And we see it all the time, these committee hearings, all this other stuff. And I wish I had an easy answer for that. I wish we could just have a couple more elections and fix it. But that really hasn't worked, right? I mean, we've had swings in elections. We've had different parties take over. And nothing really seems to change with respect to fiscal and debt. And so I do think the incentives would be different. And I think you'd have a expectation of getting a positive result.
And I think as far as momentum and where the traction can be, we've seen no traction at the federal level. We have another option, and I think there is much more traction at a state level where we look at budgets differently. There's a different atmosphere. You also have, Lauren, what's the current number of states that have signed on right now?
28.
So built back up to 28, I think there may be 2 or 3 that are seriously in play, and I'm not putting Kentucky in there. We're just for information only today. Well, we're getting close to 33. You get to 32, we may get some response from the feds. If we don't do that, then every how long you're sitting in that chair, this issue is going to pop up, because whatever happens at the federal level with that much debt and that much deficit spending going on, it will continue to squeeze and hurt anything that we grow in Kentucky will receive bad rain.
Thanks. And just a second question quickly, and I appreciate that. And with the proposed balanced budget amendment as being discussed here, I mean, I'm just trying to understand at the federal level, who would be the arbiter of a balanced budget? Is this the courts? And there's also mention of national emergencies, like So can the president just declare a national emergency for his whole term? I mean, we're dealing with humans here, so I just appreciate your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, I think Lauren's the best guy to answer that because he's on the weeds. But I'd say when you're making the call for balanced budget, you are not endorsing a specific proposal. You're saying Kentucky is on board with this, and then either the Congress with pressure will write it or potentially an Article 5 convention. But so some of those questions are absolutely going to be debated, and I know Lauren's thought a lot about them.
Lauren, before you do, I'm going to hit that. So just think. Congress can propose an amendment. They draft it, they set the terms, and they can set it out for ratification, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. The other route is to go to a proposed convention, balanced budget, move that on. Congress could act. If it does not, the second way, Article 5. Congress doesn't do the proposing at that point nor control the draft. This is something where a convention would come together with faithful delegates, with all the guardrails built in on a single subject, and then you get into those issues. Okay, is this we're going to start it at year one? Don't know that that's going to be possible. Is it going to be over a 10-year spread to feather in over time? How are we going to deal? It starts those conversations. It gets those conversations hopefully to a resolution with everybody just discussing with a lot of energy and thought behind it, with direction through their faithful delegate mechanisms, and we can come to a conclusion that is workable. Not just, if you look, read House Concurrent Resolution 45. I've got multiple copies in a cover sheet. But if you read those a page and a half, it's not going to answer all the questions that you're alluding to. That's what the convention is for, or the first mechanism discussed, Congress can work it out itself and propose its own on its terms. But that's how you work out the details. Either Congress would or the convention would, and you will deal with everything that needs to get an amendment to come back for ratification consideration. Lauren, I hope that was covered.
Yeah, that was kind of a two-part question. The first is, if you have a balanced budget mandate in the United States Constitution, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's how Congress budgets. No more debt ceiling, no more continuing resolutions. You go back to a yearly budget from the Budget Control Act of 1974, essentially. And people talk about, oh, well, the federal government doesn't follow the Constitution. You know, if you go through our most prized amendments, the First Amendment, you can still protest, you can still worship freely, you still have freedom of the press. Second Amendment, last time I checked, you have the right to bear arms. Think about the 22nd Amendment. You still have two-term limit on the president. Think about the 16th Amendment. Unfortunately, we still have an income tax. You could go on and on and on. Constitutional amendments are abided by and followed. The other thing that you referred to is the emergencies. And it's true that the president can declare emergencies, and some of them have been ongoing since like the 1970s. I think there may even be one that Jimmy Carter declared. Well, it's very clear in the convention in the amendment language is that any emergency exemption, like for war or national emergency, that has to be okayed by a 2/3 vote of Congress. Whatever emergencies the president has declared have nothing to do with suspending the balanced budget requirement for either war or for national emergencies. And then you have to reauthorize that every 12 months with a new 2/3 vote. So Congress can't just authorize endless wars or endless emergencies.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Representative Hodgson.
Yes, thank you for being here, Governor. Just a question. In order to get to the 38 states, we have to have a specific call from all those states? Because I've had at least 3 different organizations contact me invoking the name of America's favorite governor and saying he's with us on the balanced budget, or he's with us on term limits, or he's with us on convention of states in general. I like the sound of a single item convention a lot better than I like an open-ended convention of the states. But again, your name has been invoked by all 3 of those groups as being in favor of it. So I just want to see where you stand on that.
Because I'm here to say balanced budget amendment, single issue call, get to 34 states. That gives us the possibility of writing an amendment and then sending it back to the states for ratification. Look, I'm not going to shy. I'm for term limits for members of Congress too. I think that would help. I think the incentives, part of the reason we have the debt is because they always want to get reelected. And so, you just pass the buck, right? And then the COS, I think there's some really good stuff in there too that's specific. But what I know is we have 28 states on balanced budget. we're pretty close to where you need to go. And some of the states that are out there, are states that I think their political DNA is going to be likely in favor of this. Kentucky, Idaho, Montana, some of these states. And then, man, you're really in a great situation. So I think doing the single subject, I think is good. I think the balanced budget amendment has gotten the most momentum. And for obvious reasons, because people see the problem. So count me in as a supporter of this. If you guys do this, and then you come back and say, Governor, we're thinking about doing term limits for members of Congress, I would tell you Florida has done it, and I would recommend that too. But I think that's a separate issue from this balanced budget call.
Well, follow up, Mr. Chairman. If Kentucky signs on with a resolution that says we want a balanced budget amendment convention, is there anything that stops someone from including us in a convention that also considers term limits and other vague things that have been suggested by people calling for convention of the states? I don't understand the limiting mechanism or the
right. So
legal precedent for
basically,
limiting.
whatever the proposal is, balanced budget amendment, you've got to get 34 states to do a call for a balanced budget amendment. Term limits, it'd be separate calls. They'd have to get 34 individual calls for term limits. And then a convention of states, they'd have to get 34 calls for that. So you can't mix and match them. So balanced budget as the most, I think by far, 28, and you add a few more states in doing that. You can't then shoehorn in these other subjects unless 34 states, have called. And I think that would be a separate issue as well. So no, that's not, and the call here is very, very precise. And you do have mechanisms at your disposal to ensure that the people that go from Kentucky, if we got to that point, if Congress didn't write it, which I really expect they will write one, then you can ensure that they're faithful to that call. And then you should. And as much as I'm in favor of term limits, if we just have a balanced budget call, the people from Florida are going to just do the balanced budget because that's what the states have asked. We have not gotten to 34 states on term limits. And as much as I want to see that, and I think it would be helpful, until you do it, you haven't reached the constitutional threshold to be able to entertain that.
One quick thing I would add is Congress has already recognized the right of the states to limit the subject at a convention. You can't take, and Congress has not been willing to take, let's say 25 from balanced budget amendment and 10 from term limits. I mean, if they were willing to do that, they would have done it already. I think term limits has 12 states. We have 28, so we'd be at 40. So we know throughout American history, there's been over 450 convention calls passed by the states, yet never a convention. Because when those convention calls come in and they're read into the congressional record, Congress takes a look at the subject limitation and says, okay, we've got 15 for this topic, 18 for that topic, but we've never gotten to the 34. We've never had a convention. So that's already been legally decided by the Congress.
Thank you. Representative Donworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question and then some comments, if I may, please.
Briefly, please.
Okay. I have a yes or no question for all three of you gentlemen. Does federal law supersede state law?
I would respectfully say it's not clearly a yes or no. It's if Congress is legislating within the enumerated powers delegated in the Constitution, then that would be supreme over state law. But if they are legislating outside the enumerated powers, then that would be a violation of the 10th Amendment, and the state law would trump.
I would go much the same way, but I'll use it in terms of preemption, and that's a very defined legal concept, which mirrors what we're talking about.
I'll go with the governor's.
Okay, thank you. So I have always understood that the United States Constitution was the supreme document, and anything otherwise would have to go to the Supreme Court of the United States for interpretation. The Constitution Amendment in Article 5, it says, and I am reading here, a call for a convention proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes. We as the states, I love the idea that we could say faithful delegates coming up. I love that we could say a single issue. The Constitution doesn't say that. It says all intents and purposes. I am not willing to put the risk of our entire country, our entire way of government at risk over that clause right there. So in 1787, the convention was called to amend the Articles of Incorporation. They did not have jurisdiction to entirely redo our Constitution. They did, and I, for one, am very glad that they did. But they did not have prior authorization. And when they added Article 5, they did not clarify how it was going to work. It could open the door for anything, including the entire fabric of our country. We have never used Article 5, the state's convention, for a constitutional amendment for very good reason. It's not clear. And so I am not willing to put our entire country at risk over this. And I think the idea of having a balanced budget is wonderful. I think we should all aspire to that. However, that is Congress's duty. And if they are not willing to do that right now, then we need to look at reforms there. We also know from years past that the state of Kentucky, the voters of Kentucky, don't like constitutional amendments. They want us to work within the structure that we have already. So I don't understand why we would be looking to go against the will of our people on that point. I would also add that the House Bill 1, the budget bill last year, that was passed by Republicans. That added to our national debt significantly. I'm going to read a text message I sent to Congressman Andy Barr.
Representative, let's keep your comments to the topic at hand, which is House Resolution 45.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It actually is related because it's related to the debt ceiling.
Briefly, please.
Okay. I was told we need growth and this is jet fuel. If we meant to have a balanced budget, it is up to Congress, and we can't do that at risk of putting our entire democracy, our entire republic at risk here. So I urge all of my colleagues to not move forward with this, while I also urge Congress to look at passing a balanced budget. But I don't think this is worth the risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Chester Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have two short questions.
Briefly, please.
Okay. If this convention were to occur, how would delegates to the convention be selected, and how would the votes of the convention be counted?
On the selection, I'll go back to a question from Representative Huff. I would highly suggest going back and look at Representative Decker's bill, I think from last year, that dealt with a lot of mechanisms for selection, for appearing at a convention, and what you do and how you report back and how those delegates are dealt with. That will give you a whole lot of detail. That was one bill that proposed how to approach it. There are other ways we can talk about that, but that's a real good reference point to see how someone could be selected and make sure that they're faithful. That hits the first part of it. The second part of your question?
The second part was, how would the votes be counted at the convention?
I'm not sure how you want an answer on it.
Well, I mean, I'll let Lauren amplify, but I think, one, I think they could set rules, but traditionally it's been one vote per state. And so you would send delegates from Kentucky, but ultimately the state would vote the same as Florida would or California would. I don't know that that's set in stone, but that's been the tradition in the United States.
I think, Representative, you bring up a great question, and that is how would you actually commission these delegates? What are the rules covering that? Well, 18 states have already passed laws that determine how they would do that within their own states, but there's actually a historic precedent for this. If you go back to prohibition, obviously after 15 years, we realized that probably wasn't a great idea. And so I think it was the 21st Amendment that was chosen to repeal prohibition. But Congress knew that the state legislatures at that time wouldn't ratify a repeal of prohibition. They just knew it politically. So they chose the second option, was to have ratification conventions held in each state capital. It was unprecedented. We'd never done that throughout American history. So every single state had to pass a new law, all 48 that existed at that point. 48 states had to pass brand new laws determining how they would elect delegates from across the state to go to the state capitol to determine whether or not to ratify. So we have a clear precedent for that. If we were ever to get to the point where we had a convention call, and let's say we're up to 22 states that had passed the delegate limitation laws, you'd need, 28 more states to pass those. So that's exactly how that would work. Now, the other question you had, how voting would be conducted. In the 30 plus conventions that our founders conducted in the colonial era, every single one of them was one vote per state. We also know clearly that our founders wanted each state to have equal representation in the constitutional amendment process. And you see that in Article 5. You see 2 voting thresholds. How many states does it take to call a convention? 2/3, 1 vote per state. How many states does it take to ratify an amendment? 3/4, 1 vote per state. So you're talking about 1 vote per state at every level. Now, if you did that today, it'd be 29 Republican-controlled legislatures, 18 Democrat, 3 split. But some people say, well, what if you did it by population? It would be about 297 to 230 something Republican to Democrat if you use the Electoral College.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief here. I think we can all agree on a balanced budget on a national level. I don't think that's a partisan issue. But the supporters argue this process empowers the states. But in an era of disinformation, hyper-partisanship, and outside funding influencing campaigns, how can you all ensure that the convention wouldn't be captured by well-financed special interest, like the donors behind this push for the convention, rather than reflecting the will of the citizens?
Well, I think that the fact that the state legislators, 28 of them, have certified this call, maybe Kentucky, maybe a few more will do it. That's not just because of donors, or I don't even know if donors were involved when the Florida legislature did it. There's people that are concerned about the fiscal trajectory of the country. I mean, I think this is not just a legitimate issue. I think it's a very pressing issue. I don't view this as some type of special interest giveaway. And, you see that in politics from time to time. This is about what trajectory are we going to go as a republic? Are we going to allow the Congress to continue to bankrupt the United States of America? And I'm convinced you're not going to avoid, a lot of the negative problems that'll happen with this mounting debt unless you have constitutional structural reforms that are going to change the incentives so that they have to do it. Kentucky has a balanced budget requirement. Florida, we have, we've run surpluses since I've been governor, but honestly, if we weren't, everyone knows you got to make the numbers work. It's not even a question. It's just that provision of not being able to go into debt, it changes the culture of how the legislature operates. The governor, and obviously we have a line item veto in Florida, so that's helpful. But all those different things, that is totally absent in Washington. And look, the way the media environment is developed, social media, you now have AI that I think it poses significant risk for truth as well. We're just going to have to navigate this as citizens. I wish, look, I have kids in elementary school. They don't do social media. I mean, we're not, as parents, we're not looking forward to that. I see stuff put out all the time that I know is 100% false. And being a public official, you get that. And so there is a lot of nonsense that gets spewed constantly, and in more so maybe than in years past because of all this. But the question is can we rise above that as Americans? Can we actually convene as our founders envisioned and do something that is going to help prolong and preserve this republic? And I think we have to. If we don't, then what are we going to say? We just let it go on autopilot and then just hope for the best, knowing that we're going to approach a cliff, at some point. So I think we owe it. In the 250th year of anniversary of the founding of this country, I think our founders would have expected us as citizens, to navigate, rise above it. They face challenges that we don't have to face at the time. We have some challenges, that they may not have had to face. So let's tackle it, the best way we can. But there'll be one issue. You either have a balanced budget or you're not. And I would also just say, it's my experience, and maybe it's different in Kentucky, donors are not asking to spend less. Donors want to spend more because they want to get money. They want to do business with government or whatever. So I don't think you're going to see donors lining up in favor of this compared to the donors that probably would not like it because they figure out the trough may be less.
One real quick technical backup for that. If you have 34 states that have clearly legally limited the convention call to a discussion of the balanced budget amendment, step 2 is Congress actually has to count those convention calls to verify there are 34 on one topic. Congress's official call would consist of a date, a place, and the amendment topic that the states had legally limited the convention to. Then when the states commission their convention delegations, they're operating under that legal limit that the states set with the 34 and then Congress recognized in the official call. So when the 50 states go to commission their delegates, there is a clear legal limit on what that convention can talk about. So as state legislatures, and we know that's who selects the delegates, traditionally the state legislatures in the colonial era selected their own members because there's a higher level of accountability. So most likely the leadership is going to be looking around at people like Representative Petrie. Who can we count on the most to do what they're being mandated or commissioned to do? They send those people to the convention operating under, and they've sworn an oath to uphold the legal limits of that commissioning document. So there's a lot of pressure that's built into this. People aren't just sent there to just, be freewheeling and do whatever they want. People are chosen. This is a very, very important moment, and the leadership and the rank and file members of each chamber are only going to send people that they believe will stick by that, and they've sworn an oath to stand by that. And if they don't, there will be legal penalties, and they may end up in jail and kicked out of the legislature.
And then on the special interest, first off, I know of no special interest support given to me on this. This is an issue. Number one. Number two, special interest is always, the influence by it is always a concern. We have that. Everyone has that. But when you talk about the actual influence of special interest, whatever they are, 34 states and every how many hundreds, if not thousands, of legislators that have to get to that point with their constituents versus a few hundred in Congress that controls the whole thing. Special interest would much rather play at the federal level than play in 34 states. And then they have to play at more states than that, whomever they may be, the amorphous special interest, for the ratification process also. So much more careful, much more diffuse, less influenced by special interest through this mechanism than the few hundred at federal level.
And I don't know if Kentucky, if the executive has line item veto over budget. They do? So I have line item veto as Florida governor. I've never had a special interest lobby for me to veto funding. They're lobbying me to keep the funding so that they get somehow could benefit from the funding. I end up vetoing it mostly anyways, but that's fine. So that's just what I've seen. I mean, the idea that this is going to be some type of thing that special interests are going to be like benefiting from fixing the fiscal. There's a lot of people that have benefited by the fiscal recklessness over the years, and so I think it's really, that's why the states. This is people driven. This is not in the halls of Congress, not in K Street. These are people in our states that want to see action, and they see the problem, and they just want to see leadership.
One thing personal I would add in regards to special interest, it seems like either George Soros or the Koch brothers get credited for everything on the left versus the right. I can tell you personally, as the guy who's led this for the last 12 years, I filed a goose egg on my income tax return 4 years in a row. There are no special interests. In other words, I made $0 from 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. I did it and lived off of my savings. So trust me, there's no special interest that will be calling in favors.
Very good. Representative Lockett, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had a couple questions, but I'll just make a statement instead. I really do believe, first of all, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for this resolution. I think it's vital that we get behind this. I don't think it's optional even at this point. I think where we are in our nation demands that we have some kind of restraint on the federal level. Congress has proven over and over again that they aren't going to do it by themselves unless they are forced to. So with that, I do believe this is not a partisan issue. This is not Republicans coming in saying, hey, we need to do this. I am curious, though, as you've gone around the country, have you come across states that have told you absolutely no, we are not doing this at all? If you have, what were the reasons that they said that?
You didn't direct that question to anybody, but I've not gone around the country on this, so I'm going to let the
That
governor
was probably
answer
towards
that
the
one.
governor.
Okay, all right, I was
Yes.
just making sure.
Well, I think actually, Lauren's been doing this. I mean, I think he can say, look, I think that there's the states that haven't done it that you would think would be oriented to it, like Kentucky, like Idaho, like Montana. I mean, they had some questions about, hey, how does Article 5 work, all these things. And I think that when you look, I think a lot of those concerns are dispelled, but I think they're with you on substance. But then they're just curious about procedure. And then there's stuff that's told about, oh, if you support this, they're going to eliminate the Constitution, which is obviously not true, but that gets out there. So I get that. Then I do think there are probably a handful of states that just their political orientation is such that, they don't want necessarily to see, the balanced budget amendment. I think, what would you say? There's probably 5 to 8 states that would probably not ratify or would not never join and probably not ratify. But you probably know more than I do on all that.
Yeah, I think the last remaining Republican states like Idaho and Montana, it would be the fears of the convention that have been pushed, for a couple of decades. That's why they're still hanging on. We just got through the Idaho House. Now we're battling through the Idaho Senate. If you go back to the original campaign that Reagan led, that got to 32 states by 1983. 20 of that were Democrat-controlled legislatures. So it was James Clark, the Democrat Senate president of Maryland, that actually passed the first convention call in 1975. He went to the National Taxpayers Union, partnered with them, and pushed this out across the country. Of those 32 states, Republicans were just along for the ride with 12. Unfortunately, it became very politicized. When you think about it, balancing budgets should not be partisan. We do that. Everybody does that. A liberal business owner versus a conservative business owner, they're both balancing their budgets. Only at the top level could this have become partisan. And it was really due to the Republicans seizing on this as an issue and really pressing forward on that. And I think Democrats did become alienated. So obviously we're now trying to get back to center. But remember, 20 of those 32 states were Democrat-controlled legislatures.
And if you will, Lauren, you mentioned this earlier, somewhat to your point and a little bit further of concerns. You mentioned earlier that there were a number that supported with resolution, and then some of those resolutions were withdrawn and the number declined. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there is an ultimate pressure lever if, oh my, something has gone really awry. There is an ultimate pressure release. House Concurrent 44 can be put out. It can also be pulled back or overridden. I don't want that to happen, but look, I'm in favor of it. They're unmitigated. I'm in favor of it, and we'll talk with anybody about all the details. But I'm also vigilant too. If I see something in the wind, if I see the weather patterns changing and I see something, if I see something I don't like, and I have my radar go off, I will be first drumming the beat of we've got to have a course correction or we withdraw. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there are much better resolutions to this issue, but I do have that in the back of my brain, and I will be vigilant about it as I would ask anyone else to, whether you vote for it or not. If it's passed, I would ask for everybody to remain vigilant. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question. Chairman Tipton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I truly appreciate all of you taking the time to come and discuss this issue. This is how policy happens. We have conversations. We ask questions. I've read Article 5 many times, and I truly believe the Founding Fathers, in their ultimate wisdom, understood there might come a time when Congress was not willing to do what was necessary, so they gave the power to the people, much like in the 10th Amendment. I hope there's no one here that believes a $38 trillion deficit that's growing is sustainable. It's not. Like's been discussed, I truly worry about the future of the United States of America. We cannot continue down this path. Sometimes people talk about kicking the can down the road, or like an ostrich sticking your head in the sand. That's truly what we've been doing on this issue. This is not a pleasant conversation because controlling spending is not popular, but I believe I truly believe we have a moral obligation to every citizen of the United States of America to address this issue, because if we don't, I truly fear for what might come down the road. I appreciate you bringing this issue. Appreciate you being here today, Governor.
Well, I just want to echo what you said. I mean, our founders, more than anyone, were very, very suspicious of power. They would not wanted to see a, quote, runaway anything. They fought a revolution over taxes that we today would probably think are modest, right? But they saw the precedent that those taxes without representation could set. So these were people who thought very deeply about, how do you have government that doesn't just run off the rails? You can't just say a 50% vote, then, that gets it. Because then what? 51% takes 49? They knew you had to have checks and balances, separation of powers. They were weary of federal power, but they knew you had to have a military. You had to regulate interstate commerce. There were certain things that had to be done that the Articles of Confederation weren't doing. And so they knew. But they were like, okay, we're going to check and balance it. We're going to make sure we reserve most of the powers of the states. But they knew that there would be times where the Constitution would need to be amended. And that's for a variety of reasons. I mean, they had to do the amendment for presidential succession. There was something that just happened, so they did it, in the 1800s. And then, of course, the post-Civil War amendments. So they understood this. But to say Congress is going to propose amendments is great if it's something that is not where Congress isn't the problem. So they knew that you had to give the people a recourse to reform the government if Congress was the problem. And where do you put that power? For them, it was natural that you would put it in the states, because the states ultimately were the ones that created the federal government. They didn't give the states the power to call a convention and change the Constitution just on that. It could propose an amendment, just like Congress can propose an amendment. Congress can't change the Constitution, and Article 5 convention can't change the Constitution. You draft, you propose, then it goes to the state legislatures for ratification, and that's a very high bar to get 38 out of the 50 states for ratification. I mean, a lot of people look and say maybe the founders were too cautious on constitutional amendments. Maybe you should have let it there. I think it's fine the way they did it, but this is not a constitution that has been amended very often, considering, we're 250 years into the republic and a little less than that for this constitution. So I just believe the people that will say, oh, this is going to run away, that's really an indictment of the wisdom of the founders. And I think that you can look at our Constitution. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's the best that's ever been done. And I think these folks were people that were very, very careful, about what they were doing. This is a legitimate mechanism for the states to be able to address problems that Congress has not been willing to address and really has become incapable of addressing.
I would just follow that up by saying we've reached the classic point at which you break the glass, pull the emergency lever. Our founders clearly wanted Congress to propose amendments as the primary option, and clearly they have. But if Congress is either unwilling or unable to propose an amendment, there is that secondary option. And the Balanced Budget Amendment classically fits that. 1995, as Governor DeSantis related, the House proposed it with a 2/3 vote. It went to the Senate, and it failed by 1 vote when the debt was about $5 trillion. Well, here we are 30 years later, we're almost 800% increase in the debt. And now we're to the point where it really is an issue. And so now we would probably qualify for that second option. Congress failed to. Now it's a serious issue. So the states maybe have no choice but to break emergency glass. But as you all know, historically, we've never had to do that. The states threaten the convention, and Congress always shows up because they want to control the drafting and the language of the amendment. They do not want to leave that to state legislators at a convention.
Thank you. I was going to offer the opportunity for summation, but I don't know that we can do better than that, other than I would like to allow the Chairman Petrie, if you have any final comments you would like to make.
We have been here for a good amount of time. I do appreciate everyone's questions, all good questions, good conversation. I go back to Representative Tipton. Discussion is healthy. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to the Governor, Mr. Ennis, for coming and helping explain and discuss. And this is for information only, so I'm not asking for a vote today. But if given the chance, I will ask for a vote in support later on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Governor Lauren, thank you for coming as well. We appreciate you providing the time for us to hear your testimony today. And I also would like to thank the committee members. I know it's a busy day, and I appreciate your attention and interest in this topic. We will continue this conversation, but having finished for the day, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.